I'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Commissioner Hopkins, would you take roll, please?
Certainly. Mr. Fox. Commissioner Voigt?
Here.
Commissioner Murphy?
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell is absent. Commissioner Grissom is absent. Commissioner Hopkins is here. Commissioner Newsom is absent. Chairperson Fox?
Here.
We have quorum of the Planning Commission. We also have present Township Planning Director Dave Campbell.
All right, moving on. Item 4, approval of our meeting agenda.
I move to approve the meeting agenda for March 13th, 2014.
I second.
A motion to approve from Commissioner Voigt, a second from Commissioner Murphy. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next up, approval of meeting minutes.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from February 27th, 2014.
Support that.
A motion to approve from Commissioner Hopkins, second from Commissioner Voigt. Are there any changes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. No public, so we'll move to item 7, public hearing. No public hearing, so we'll move to item 8A, site plan application number 522, shared driveway application number 132 for 10825 Dunham Road. I think it'd probably be best to turn this over to Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you this evening is an application for a shared driveway on a 17.5-acre parcel on the north side of Dunham Road, just a little bit west of Clark Road. What the applicant proposes to do is split this property right across the middle here, resulting in a approximately 9-acre parcel on the north and a 9-acre parcel on the south. As you hopefully can tell from this aerial, there's an existing house here up in the northwest corner of the parent parcel. And what the applicant would like to do is pick up and relocate an existing house and site it somewhere in this kind of clearing area here, just around where it says 17 acres on that aerial picture. For him to be able to do that, he would need the township to approve a land division application, and the land division application can be approved administratively. However, the zoning ordinance is clear that prior to any administrative approval of a land division application, a shared driveway must be approved, and only the Planning Commission can approve a shared driveway. So the applicant has submitted an application for the Planning Commission to consider that shared driveway this evening. As I mentioned, there is an existing house here, and the existing driveway runs more or less right along the westerly property line. The applicant's proposed shared driveway would shift the access off of Dunham Road about, I think it's 100 feet further east in order to meet the site distance requirements of the Livingston County Road Commission. The Road Commission has already approved not the driveway permit, but the site distance permit. The applicant also is in the process of getting the necessary approvals from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, the MDEQ, because this area in through here is a regulated wetland, an extension of the Orr Creek wetland area. So that permit application is also in process. The application was reviewed by the township engineer and the township attorney. The engineer, and both of which is required by Section 5.23 of the zoning ordinance for procedures. The engineer looks at the shared driveway application to ensure that it meets the design guideline, the design standards of the zoning ordinance in terms of its width and its subbase and its design and its ability to accommodate large emergency vehicles. Also looking at things like grades and drainage. And the township attorney looks at any shared driveway application because one of the requirements of Section 523 of the zoning ordinance is that any shared driveway must have the access easement and a maintenance agreement for that access easement. And the township attorney needs to look at both of those to ensure that they are correct and that they are in a form that's recordable by Livingston County. The other reviewing agency is the Township Fire Marshal, who looks at it in terms of emergency access and whether the driveway is being designed and oriented in order to promote health, safety, welfare. The engineer submitted a review letter dated February 20th where they recommended approval subject to some items to be revised on the construction drawings. Perhaps most notably of those is, for one, widening of the driveway. What's proposed by the applicant is 20 feet. The engineer notes that the zoning ordinance requires a 22-foot shared driveway. And perhaps more notably, the requirement that any shared driveway over 600 feet must include a cul-de-sac turnaround or a T turnaround. Now, in conversations with the applicant, who up to the moment hasn't joined us, they question whether a T turnaround should be required. Right now, if you can see on the survey, the westerly property line is 632 feet from the center line of Dunham Road. And having noted, the applicant has joined us this evening. The shared driveway off of Dunham, the way the access easement has been drafted, runs all the way to the proposed north property line of Parcel 2. So it's actually a little bit more than 632 feet because it has this curve to it. So what the engineer is saying is that because it's over 600 feet, a T turnaround would be required. And that is what's stated in Section 5.23 of the zoning ordinance. The applicant can explain to us his rationale for why he thinks a T turnaround may or may not be warranted in this instance. And our township the Hartland Deerfield Fire Marshal has also had a chance to weigh in specifically on the T turnaround, and he has some thoughts on that as well that we can discuss perhaps once the applicant has an opportunity to provide his thoughts. The township attorney has had an opportunity to review the easement and maintenance agreement and has some revisions proposed, and so long as the applicant agrees to those revisions, then the attorney is fine with the maintenance agreement and the easement language as drafted. Overall, the recommendation of the planning department, taking into account the respective reviews of the township engineer and the attorney and the fire marshal, is a recommendation for the planning commission to approve site plan application number 522 for the shared driveway at 1025 Dunham Road, subject to the construction plans addressing the outstanding comments noted by the township engineer and the fire marshal in their review letters, the applicant revising the maintenance agreement per the recommendations of the township attorney, and the applicant acquiring the necessary wetlands permits from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. And should the Planning Commission so choose, the Planning Department has offered some recommended motion language depending on which direction the Planning Commission wishes to go. Happy to answer any questions you may have, or wait until we hear from the applicant to do so.
Okay. Want to join us?
Sure.
All righty. Oh, that's all right.
Either place.
Yep, either place.
Regarding the T turnaround, we had some conversations earlier on when we were putting together this entire site plan, and one of the first things that we did identify was the driveway and the ordinance pertaining to the 600 feet. So my engineer, along with the Jack over at Carl Smith surveying, he's at the point right now to where he's drawing where the house is going to fit on the property, so we can finish the final phase of for both the building department and also for the township. But he didn't put it on this set of drawings as far as where the turnaround was until I received the review letter, is when it first came to my attention that about 600 feet. And then I had a conversation with Dave and also Mike over at the fire department pertaining to the concern, because from the very beginning, we knew he had to stay underneath that distance, to reach it, in which we are. The driveway will cut off approximately, it's going to be about 400 to 500 feet
I apologize, I sent over an email later to you this afternoon, Dave. I mean, just an hour ago, so I know you didn't probably get it.
Okay.
You're still.
I did not.
But I just I measured it off on Google Earth. But it's going to be well under, the bottom line, it's going to be under the 600 feet. And that's the way we interpreted the ordinance. The question came up then, if that is what the ordinance is, because we could have worked with obviously my position is with which most applicants would want to do the same is, if you can avoid the additional costs, you want to do that. The driveway is already going to be improved. It's going to be widened. It's going to be a much safer and accessible drive for the fire department to get down there. The other option is dropping the property line to 599 feet, which, takes care of it. I guess what I'd like to try to do, I want to conform with what the ordinance is and obviously do it as cost effectively as possible. So that's pretty much where we are on the driveway, but the actual split will be well under the 600 feet.
Dave, could he just cut the driveway easement off where the split is then? Since the shared part is only really to the end of the first driveway.
I thought that's what he proposed.
Well, the way this, I'll answer your question and Keith's question, I hope. The way this shared driveway easement is shown on the plan and how it's drafted as far as the easement language shows it going all the way to the north property line of parcel 2. So a strict interpretation of that would be that's the way the shared driveway easement has been drafted, and therefore that easement is more than 600 feet. Now, a couple things could happen. Mr. Beauchamp is correct. This property line could be moved. The way the easement language has been drafted, the shared portion could cut off at the 500-foot mark, wherever that is, and then the remainder, what would then become the private driveway easement for parcel 1, could then not be considered a shared driveway. It would just be a private driveway at that point, a private driveway easement going across the last 100 or so feet of parcel 2. That would require rewriting the easement description and redrafting how it's shown on the survey and on the plan. But Keith, Mr. Voigt, to answer your question, the easement as shown today goes all the way to the north property line, the shared driveway easement, so technically it is over 600 feet.
So either way, he has to reword the easement language, because if you bring the property line down to 599 feet, so the driveway is 599, he's going to redo not only the legal descriptions of the two parcels, but he's also going to have to redo the driveway easement language because it's now shorter.
That's correct.
It goes to the property line. It gives the court. It gives all the legal description.
Exactly. If this line were to move, the legal description of both parcel 1 and parcel 2 would have to be changed in addition to the easement language. Or if the shared driveway easement portion were to cut off at the 500-foot mark, then this last 100 and so feet would have to be described as a private driveway easement going across a portion of parcel 2.
What are the differences between the shared driveway and a conventional driveway?
Shared driveway has to be 22 feet wide. It has to be able to withstand so many tons of vehicle. It has to have so many inches of subbase. There's certain design guidelines, excuse me, for a shared driveway. Frankly, residential driveways have few. If it's only serving one single-family home, there's few design guidelines for that, other than the culvert and the other things that the road commission would require. Where the driveway acts as the public road. But once it gets onto your property, you design your driveway to the standard that meets your needs.
And so the fire department or the fire marshal would then have to determine whether there's going to be a T, which would probably be, if it was a split like that, or if it was a shared up until the property line, so there would be either a T there or a cul-de-sac there. They would terminate right at that location.
If it's all agreed by all parties that it is greater than 600 feet. Now, Mr. Beauchamp is advocating that in this case things can be changed so that it's not 600 feet. But if there were a clear-cut instance where, yes, there's a shared driveway that certainly exceeds 600 feet, then it's not necessarily the fire marshal's call whether or not to require it. It's in our zoning ordinance. It's this planning commission's call whether or not to require it. That said, my understanding is that when this shared driveway language was drafted, it was the fire marshal's office in particular that wanted to see some language, some sort of a maximum for a shared driveway length, and once we exceed that maximum, then you would have a T turnaround, and the number that was decided upon was the 600-foot mark.
It just involved with the accessibility for big trucks or ambulances and not having to back out, turn around, all those kinds of things.
I live on a road like that, and we have to have that ability. We have to just have the ability for the homeowners to be safe. So get emergency equipment to the premises.
So I don't. It would seem like, just keeping in mind what that road ordinance was put together to be, that there's an easy solution. There's two of them. It's an A or a B. It's either move the property line or cut the shared driveway easement off at 500 feet.
So you're proposing that we could say, go back 500 feet, and the easement stops at 500 feet for a shared driveway, and then from 5 to 600 feet, it's a private drive that's on somebody else's property?
Yeah.
I wouldn't support that. I mean, that seems to be not what was intended by the revision when we put this in.
He's got to know it said A or B. He's not going to do a turnaround. So he can move the property line.
Move the property line, then, would be mine. I mean, that's mine.
Because the fire truck's going up in one way or another, with or without the access easement.
Yeah,
You do allow single driveways to cut across people's driveway, or other people's property, and that does happen. So he's just converting from one easement to another. I don't have a preference which way it goes. I just think they're both viable options.
Yeah, well, I know it's been a while since we looked at one of these things. The whole thing seems strange that you have a shared driveway for so many feet and then it becomes a private drive, but it's really just a continuation of the same.
But the driveway from the shared driveway to the first house on parcel 2 is a private drive once it leaves the shared driveway. So really, it's no different. The one just goes up straight and the other one is off to the right. The shared portion is only the part that both properties are driving on. And it's really, other than that, I think private driveways probably come off of the shared.
What happens, though, if we agree to stop the responsibility of the shared driveway for him just basically around where his house is, and then it becomes a standard driveway? But he still has another couple hundred feet or so of his property that he could do whatever he wants to, which he could build a pole barn, or he could have storage back there, and he'd be using that person's private driveway even though it's on his property, so he feels he has the right to it, so there's nothing we could do to prevent that. That's the concern I would have.
Right. I guess I would agree with it. I mean, with words you're saying, we're saying that was okay. I would think that would be in the face of what a shared driveway, if he's going to use it to get to the back portion of his property, it's a shared drive.
Correct. And so the purpose of a shared driveway is probably for vehicular traffic to go in opposite directions, so it has to be wide enough,
Right.
at least for that. So even if there was a build site determined on parcel 2, and I know it wasn't talked about per se, but the shared driveway just go to where that build site is, and the driveway go from that point on, that would not allow that person on parcel 2 to maybe ever build an outbuilding, maybe keep, that's what you just said, beyond that, because now you'd have the loss of that traffic in both directions.
It would depend if they use that access, but yeah.
An outbuilding for which parcel?
Two.
The first one. Yeah. Your home, there's a build site on 1, correct? That's where the home's going to go?
Correct. Well, there's an
There's
existing
already a
home
home on 1 already.
Oh, that's the existing home.
there's an existing home.
I misunderstood that.
Yep, and then the new home will go on too. But a couple things, and I get where you're coming from, and I would say those are both those are real good viable concerns. But within parcel 2, if I can point this out, Now, you get up to where that plus sign is, you can go back to where you were. None of this property is landlocked on parcel 2. So once that split happens, there's no reason for parcel 2 to be landlocked to put a barn anywhere on that property if it's permitted. So beyond that split, where the driveway extends to parcel 1, there's no need for it to service a building. Because you have access all the way where that drive is going to cut across, you're going to easily be able to put it going straight back to the barn if you put a barn in that area. Because the house is going to go to the northeast corner of the property. So if you get a landlocked piece of property, I can see where that would come in. And back to the ordinance and some of the other questions is the way I understand the ordinance, unless I'm hearing it incorrectly, is it's pertaining to a shared driveway. There's not going to be a shared driveway beyond the point of the split. So it doesn't exist. So we're not, in my opinion, that's directly how it's wrote up, unless I'm interpreting something incorrectly here. But beyond that split, it becomes an easement. It's not a shared driveway because there has to be 2 structures or multiple structures or multiple locations for it to be servicing as a good point, a potential pole barn if you have no access or if part of that property was landlocked. But there's no landlocked. There's nothing there that would cause parcel 2 to use that easement.
Is there ever an option to split parcel 2? Because if someone wanted to split parcel 2, let's say after you...
But it would have to go to a private road then, because you can't have a shared driveway more than 2.
That was the limit then, okay, all right. So that takes that right now.
And it's a bigger easement and a bigger road, the drive surface.
And the reason that was even put in that package as an easement, because what there is there's just an error on the gentleman who drew it up. Unfortunately, he's no longer here. He passed away, unfortunately, in the middle of all this. But what it should have been done when it was presented is right where it's split. That's the way it should have been drawn up. That's the way it should have been written. Is it's shared driveway up to where it splits, and then beyond there it should have been an easement.
What split are you talking?
Where it splits off the shared driveway to the private driveway parcel 2.
Mr. Beauchamp, if I pulled up the aerial, would you be able to point out approximately where you see siting the house on parcel 1? That might help.
The driveway's going to be moved over here to meet site distance for the road commission. It's going to come straight up and basically just beyond the wetland, which is right here. It's going to split off going to the house on parcel 2. The house will be located right in this area and over there. Then from there, this drive, the existing drive, will continue going back to the back parcel. So where this split happens, it's going to be right about here. Beyond there, this is just a single drive distance for the property. Is that what you're looking for, Dave? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it kind of helps give some reference of where everything's going to lay out.
This is where, and again, it's not, we can adjust it. However, I'm not asking for us to, I don't feel like we're working around what is written. But if for some reason, if it's perceived as that it's not a big deal, we'll just move that property line up and achieve the same thing. That property line, it's not hard to set one way or the other. 30, 40 feet isn't going to affect us.
Sounds like what you're saying is the property line shouldn't determine where the shared driveway ends. Right?
Correct.
You're saying where it should end is at the split.
At the split.
That would be the only location where you'd have 2 vehicles in opposite directions.
Correct. I've got a property out in Fowlerville we split years ago, and basically the easement for the back parcel ran right through along the side, just like this, right through the other property. And that property there, nobody else uses that driveway except for the back parcel. but I do understand, I think Larry had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned regarding a pole barn or something like that. It's a very good point. If this was in a situation where this was a wet vein in here, and there was a buildable spot there, to put a pole barn on the parcel 2, and that would be the only one, then I could say, yeah, absolutely. What's to say, you're either going to have to somehow put restrictions that you can never build there because we're defining that as a single driveway, or, but it's not landlocked at all. This is all dry. So once that's split off, this person comes home and they go up to their house and they drive under that 600-foot distance, they have no reason, unless they're going to visit that back parcel, to even go beyond that. Technically, per the easement, they shouldn't be parking anything, obstructing it, or anything. That's their easement for that. So it's not shared, at that point in time.
But does that mean that they couldn't use that trail or that driveway to access the rear part of their property? If that was the case you just mentioned, right where the shared stopped at the split.
Okay, yeah.
Shared stops at the split, and then the rest is easement.
Yep.
But the easement, so they couldn't drive that easement to get to the back of parcel 2?
I mean,
That's what he's-
what's the need? You're driving around somewhere, you come in, the path of least resistance and convenience is you're going to pull in, you're going to pull right there. You're going to pull. There's no need to it. There's no wetland, there's no obstructions.
Is the question, could they legally do it, or would they have reason to do it regardless of... I mean, because you could draft a private road easement to say for exclusive use of the owner of parcel 1, and then if the folks on parcel 2 were using it for any reason, technically they'd be violating the terms of that private driveway easement. And if you did it that way, exclusive use of the easement for parcel 1, then they shouldn't be building a pole barn or anything else where they would need to drive on that private driveway to get to their pole barn.
I would think that is the only way you would not let the private, or you would let the private or the shared driveway stop prior to, because we can sit here and say all day the guy in parcel 2 doesn't have any reason to go back, access his property because he has other routes. 10 or 15 years from now, who knows who the owner of this property is, and they've got this drive, and they, oh boy, I can use that to get back there, and boom, then that's what he's expecting to do. So I would say the only way you let the shared end short of the property line is make the easement exclusive so that the person in the back has some protection of that being used by.
And if I'm understanding, I think that's, at least in my mind, what we're thinking is the shared easement stops somewhere here, and then from here to here, it's a exclusive private drive easement, like we have on a lot of properties in the township. And
Isn't that the way easements work anyways? You can't build, you can't, there's limitations on it? I mean, I don't know, I'm just asking. I mean, I'm fine with adding language like that, but I wasn't, anytime there was an easement, I thought we're limited what you could build or do.
I guess concerned about the use of it, the ability, like I think you were getting at, Larry, is the fact that you could use it. Whether you're going to build on it, I understand, because of the easement. What if they just wanted to drive on it, drive to the back to cut a tree down, or for some purpose, because it's, in their opinion, it's on their property.
If the site plan, does it put a tool there for the township if the site plan is clearly marked where it is a shared driveway in that, so if someone comes in at a later date to get a land use permit for a pole barn, that they have to show where it's going and where the driveway is going to it and stuff, and then it kind of, you've got it right there,
Well, if you went with the exclusive word for the driveway easement, the second piece, the private part on parcel 2, you could probably just avoid some fight with a couple people that live there in a few years if the private driveway portion needs repair. And all of a sudden, because that's one of the things the shared driveway and the maintenance agreements and all that is, so there aren't disputes. So probably it would make sense to take the private driveway piece that's in parcel 2 and say for exclusive use of parcel 1. And then you don't get into any ambiguous language or misunderstandings or not anything that basically would lead to a maintenance dispute if the driveway needed to be regraded or new gravel or whatever it would be, because it's exclusive. And if the guy on parcel 2 allows the guy on parcel 1, or parcel 1 allows the guy on parcel 2 to use it, and damage occurs to it or it needs to be done, the agreement says it was exclusive to 1 and it's your problem. And if you let him use it, that's your problem. And it might solve that issue. So maybe through all of this, the legal part of it down the road, which is why we got into the private maintenance agreement, the driveway maintenance agreements and all that anyways, was so these things get taken care of. And there isn't a dispute when we've got third property owner on parcel 2 and the original on parcel 1, and they say, well, that's not the way it used to be when Bob lived there. Well, it's the way it is in the legal documents.
I agree with that. I wouldn't want to be living on parcel 2 and then have another 100 foot left over. So shared driveway to where their kids are tearing it up, coming up and down.
So to me, yeah, exactly. So to me, you either need to move the property line to avoid that issue, or I think the exclusive use of parcel 1 might solve some of that.
That's satisfactory to the, I'm finding it.
To me, that would solve what I think I'm hearing.
So you're saying you'd have essentially 2 easements, a shared driveway easement to this point, an exclusive driveway easement from somewhere in here to the end of this property line, and that exclusive easement gives this parcel 1 and only parcel 1 the rights to it, but would also protect parcel 2 from having to maintain it. It's parcel 1's driveway, and parcel 2 can't use it, but parcel 2 also doesn't have to pay to maintain it.
That's right. And I would give the choice of which way to go. For me personally, I'm 6 of one, half dozen of another on it, because I think it's really just trying to get through that issue with it for me, more than whether there's a smaller or bigger parcel or somebody's got an easement on somebody's other property, because there are easements all over this township on people's property. So I can get over that part of it. It's just who's going to take care of it. If there's a dispute, what does the paper say? And then that rules it. Because when we built the private road ordinance and all those things, a lot of it got into the maintenance and how's this stuff going to be taken care of. And that's all this really boils down to me.
I think before you make your decision, you need to make sure you understand, if you go with the exclusive driveway easement, you're basically limiting the rest of your property. And it may not see it in your eyes, but the next homeowner that comes along, buys it from you, may feel restricted because he can only come off of your driveway now that you built to your house. And so you basically have that property out there that's going to be limited usage to someone else.
What's the easement?
Well, if you wanted to go with the shared driveway to your house, and then from that point on use the exclusive use private drive terminology, then you would have that small distance of a driveway or standard driveway on your property that you couldn't use for anything. So before you decide whether you want to move the property line or go with the exclusive driveway, you probably should make sure, I want to make sure you understand that you're, in my view, I think you may be, and make sure that you aren't limiting the use of that property in the future. But that's all. I mean, it's up to you to make, I just want to make sure you understand that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
But Jared, right?
Jared,
Yeah, not that you couldn't find another way to access the rear of the property, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Right, you just couldn't use that portion.
Right. And I said limited, I didn't say...
Yep, no, I understand, yeah.
I mean, somebody may not want to drive, if they come up with a big tractor or something, or a big dump truck, they may not want to drive it into their driveway to get to this other driveway to the pole barn. Well, then he'd be forced to do that if he went with the exclusive private drive.
Once the shared driveway easement ends, the width can narrow down, the road width can narrow.
It'd just be like any other, it'd probably be the driveway that's there now, I suspect.
Could be a gravel, whatever width a private driveway can be.
Yep.
So now
What's the
we
easement width on that, Dave?
I'm not,
Or for the easement, what was the?
22?
Hartland's easement?
you're showing a 40-foot easement
40-foot easement.
for the shared driveway.
I appreciate what you're saying, Keith. I think, plowing private roads, trust me, I've done a lot of it this winter. Personally, once that division happens anyways, there's enough property, it's not like you're limited for space, and there's no lowland that you have to work around. So in my opinion, parcel 2, as soon as that T happens or the split off, whatever they do on their parcel comes off their driveway. It's a boundary, it sets boundaries, it's eliminated, and I like the point, even what Larry said, I didn't even think about that, I literally have people that tell me, well, just plow up to the property line and don't do any more. I'm sorry. So it does clean up a lot of that stuff, too, by having to split off and having exclusive.
Well, and I've seen before us have issues between neighbors of people using another person's easement, and it's just much better for everybody concerned if they know what the ground rules are at the very beginning.
Correct. And with the size of the parcel and the usable land at that point in time, 40 foot shouldn't make a difference one way or the other. But I do appreciate it because you bring up, if it was a different situation, it was more compact and tight, absolutely, it might be nice to have a barn right on that property line, or the easement line, and have the driveway coming right in the side of it or something like that. But there's no limitations of wetlands or that there's a need for that. So.
When are you planning on moving the house? Because that's the ultimate goal here, is to move that house. Trying to get a timeline here.
Timeline, I'm working with Tom over at DEQ, and I talked to him, it's been now, checked in with him last week again, but approximately a week and a half ago, when we were going through some stuff, he had told me right then and there they were about 6 weeks out, give or take, because they weren't very backed up. So they're doing, he said the longest thing at this point in time is they got to mail a letter out. I had to give them additional information on all the surrounding properties. They do a letter out to everybody because it's they call them different, the type of permit it is. But once he has that done, then pretty much it's just paperwork the way I understand it. All the flagging happened in the fall. Everything that needed to happen was done. So beyond that, to answer your question, Larry, the house mover is ready. They've got some other projects they're working on. In fact, he emailed me this afternoon. It's just a matter of getting it in the schedule. I'm going to say midsummer is probably a ballpark time frame that it can happen.
I guess the reason I was asking, since there's so much in motion here, is there an urgency to act on this tonight? Can you figure it all out and get it all right before we act on it, or do we want to act on it and define what it is that you're deciding you want to do if you're deciding here right now?
I part of that, I don't want to sound flippant when I say that's up to you, but that is part of your decision. I will say that I feel like I have a good sense of what we want to see accomplished here, and if you were to choose to do some sort of approval conditional on administrative verification that the shared driveway easement and the exclusive easement have been drafted in a manner consistent with the discussion here tonight, I think we could do it that way. The alternative would be bring it back here once those issues have been resolved and have you act on it then.
Is that the option you want to go with, or do you not know, or do you want to move the property line? Do you know?
Let me ask you this, Dave. If there, I know this issue just came up pertaining to this, but if we're all on the same page, I don't see anything that obstructs. My only concern would be if we approve it and somehow, some way, something popped up that was overlooked. But all the research I think I've done, that's been quite a bit over, especially since I got that review letter, shows me that we should be fine based on that. So I'll leave it up to you guys.
Well, I'll leave it to you to say which option are you picking.
I would pick where we split off and then just do a isolated easement. If I get that, I mean, you guys are meeting every other week, right?
Usually, not always, but yeah, we are typically scheduled to, yeah.
Okay. I mean, it might be a good idea just to have Jack finish drawing it out. He was supposed to be on the site last Friday, putting the house on there and everything. I'm more than happy to come back. I don't think the overall picture is going to slow things down, the big picture. I would say maybe we should just do that. Over there you've got more of a complete set of what's happening.
I would be more comfortable with that, too.
Yeah, I would see that you'd have a drawing and then the paperwork, the description of what your job is, of the property and what you want to do with it, it all match up. Because right now, it kind of sounds like it won't.
Well, plus we have details. It doesn't show the proper road width.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could be cleaned up.
If you can show where that your driveway is going to go approximately off of the shared driveway, and then where the private drive is going to be continuing on would be good.
Okay. That's what we'll do.
Okay.
Sounds good. So just get with Dave
Okay.
when you got it all back together.
Sounds good.
All right?
I think he's got me on speed dial.
Thanks, Jared.
Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Looks like 8D goes right back to our planning director, Dave, the blight ordinance.
So the township, really since last year, has been working on a blight and nuisance ordinance that really would consolidate and enhance some of the existing standards that we have spread across a few ordinances, including our existing nuisance ordinance from 2003 and some of the performance standards and some of the parking standards and other things within the zoning ordinance. The intent here is that this ordinance would consolidate a lot of those requirements and bring them into one ordinance. A lot of the work that was done on this was done by the township's zoning inspector, formerly known as our code enforcement officer. And that's good because he's the one who's actually out there on a daily, weekly basis enforcing these things. And so after much work by him and by myself and by the review by the township manager and the township attorney, we feel like we have a ordinance here that really has the teeth that our zoning inspector needs to decisively and effectively enforce the violations that he sees on a daily, weekly basis. As I mentioned in the cover letter that hopefully you have dated March 4th, this is a general law ordinance that doesn't require review by the Planning Commission, but we certainly thought that it was a good idea to bring it to the Planning Commission, just because a lot of the work that the Planning Commission does, one way or another, can touch on code enforcement type issues. And we certainly appreciate, something of an outsider's perspective on something that we see, working from the inside on. I don't know if the Planning Commission wishes to me to kind of go through it point by point or page by page or maybe wait for questions. But the idea here is that we get as much feedback as we can from the Planning Commission, and we make some revisions. I already have some revisions that I want to make based on taking another hard look at this over the last couple of weeks, and hopefully get it before the Township Board for adoption. Really before if the snow ever does melt, really before the spring comes and we start seeing some of these code enforcement issues that start popping up in the spring and summertime. People, parking their cars where they shouldn't be, or putting their boats where they shouldn't be, or grass getting overgrown. Those are the things that we don't want to see come spring and summertime. So we'd like to see this get adopted in the near future.
I'm fine with asking you my few questions. What would you guys like?
Yeah, that's the way I'm
Comfortable with that?
Sounds good for me also.
Does anybody have any? I've got a couple.
My first one's on page 3. Somebody have one sooner than that? So on letter H, number 2, you're defining junk or abandoned automobile. And definition says, any motor vehicle or portion thereof which for a period of 30 consecutive days or more does not have an engine in running condition, 4 inflated tires, and a battery. So if it has, so the way I read that is, it's not a junk or abandoned vehicle unless it meets all of
Any combination, sorry to jump in, any combination of any of those 1 through 5?
Yeah, but within 2 itself, which would be, okay, it's a junk vehicle because it is a motor vehicle that's been on for 30 consecutive days and does not have an engine. But it has 4 inflated tires and a battery.
Okay.
To me, the way I read that, it would not be a junk or abandoned vehicle, because you're saying that it has to...
Oh, you're saying because it has to meet all of those criteria?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the way I would say that's written.
Change and or and fix that or not?
And/or?
Well, I don't think you want and or.
How about have an engine in running condition or for inflated tires or a battery?
I'd almost change in the front of where you start listing it and say, does not have any of the following, or one of the following, and then list them.
Okay.
Well, it actually says that right at the bottom of H includes any combination of the following.
But I think that means 1 through 5, maybe not inclusive of just within 2.
Right. That's
Just the way I would read that. Not sure, but that's the way I would read it.
Yeah, reading it again and again here, yes, the way that sentence is structured, I think it implies that all of those 3 criteria within number 2 have to be met. And those 3 criteria being the running engine, the tires, and the battery. And what we want to say, I would agree, is any of those 3 meet the criteria of being a violation of number 2.
And then the next one is on K, the 3rd line down. First word you have is motor, but I think you really want mortar.
Yes. Thank you.
My next question is on 6, so if anybody has anything between those 2.
Page 6 or section 6?
Page 6.
I'm fine up to there.
So at the top of page 6, talk about number 5 seems to speak about some so my question is, do we have such a thing? And so I think it's talking here about an officer, official, or township board, or be designated or be granted in a special hardship case beyond. Do we have such a mechanism? I guess is,
We have not established such a mechanism or such a procedure for that case.
Okay. So that's something we'll be putting in place if this passes. Okay. My next is on page 7.
I'm on 7 also.
Okay. I'll let you go first, so it doesn't seem like I'm the only one saying anything.
I passed one. I should have already stepped in.
We'll back up for you. What do you got?
Can we go back to 3, please?
Page 3?
Yeah, 3F near the top. So, trailer coach, any vehicle primarily designed and used as temporary living quarters for recreational, camping, or travel purposes and drawn by another vehicle. when we put in drawn by another vehicle, does that take out of there what's considered a motor home? And I wonder if they want to change that wording, and because the way I read that is it's got to be drawn by another vehicle, which would take motorhome out of it, because motorhomes are not drawn by other vehicles.
Would E, though, define a motor vehicle that you're talking about?
That's the answer I was thinking of giving.
Because it says any wheeled vehicle, which is self-propelled.
Okay, it looks like it looks like that would cover for it, but before the meeting, I just mentioned to Larry Fox for a moment, and I kind of saw duplication throughout this, but it's probably maybe for different purposes. So if H would cover that, that was just my concern, is that we don't exclude a motorhome.
E would cover a motorhome. So whether it's a car or a truck or a van or a motorhome, it's all covered under an E. And then F would be a camper or something else that gets towed by a motor vehicle.
Okay. Yeah. That's clear. I think I just had to read through it again. I'm good. Thank you.
This one is probably just my inability to put this sentence together in thought. On page 7, F3, the land beyond the required front, side, and rear yards as defined by the Township zoning ordinance on a property of any size zone CA containing a principal structure. What is that? Could you explain that a little bit, or give me a visual? What are we talking about?
So I will say letter F, we did our best to... so letter F, as you can see, has to do with keeping your grass and other vegetation cut at a reasonable level so we don't get the overgrown yards. As you can guess, it's pretty straightforward. When someone has a half-acre lot in a residential district, we want to see the grass get cut. When someone's got 9 acres out on Hibner Road somewhere, there may be different standards there, or different expectations, I guess, for keeping your grass cut under 6 inches in the same manner that you would on a half-acre lot in a residential subdivision. That being said, within letter F, numbers 1 through 4 are the attempts of the planning department to put some parameters around those maybe gray areas where you've got bigger property, and in certain circumstances, the expectations of keeping the grass cut 6 inches or less aren't necessarily reasonable or what we want to do. That all being said, number 3, the idea is if you have property zone CA conservation agriculture, you have to keep it mowed within your required front, side, and rear yards. But if you have a house that's set very far back on a larger piece of property, and that property is zone CA, we're not going to necessarily make you keep the entire acreage mowed, but you certainly need to keep it mowed along your property line so that it doesn't become a nuisance for your neighbors, or so it doesn't look blighted from the road. That's the intent there.
Okay.
So, I guess that being said, so I have a 6-acre piece of property, or what size property is that we just looked at earlier?
About 8.5.
Beauchamp?
Yeah.
Just under 9.
So I have to go around the whole perimeter of that and mow it all?
Let me think about that one. Believe me, we did go through all the. We did try to go through all the what ifs with this, but as you can guess, there's a lot of what ifs. So you've got 9 acres. It's not agricultural, and it's between 1 and 10. Then you have to at least mow the required front and side and rear yards. Yes.
So I think you'd have a lot of property in this township that would be in violation of this.
I would agree with that.
Plus there's wetlands that he couldn't get to all of them.
I will say that we did, again, we spent a lot of time on this one. We do want to add a discretionary clause on this one, particularly, and then this was based in part on a conversation with Sue Grissom, who gave me a call earlier today, and she kind of mentioned the same thing. Sue herself has a large piece of property, and a lot of it is prairie grass that she doesn't keep mowed down, and that's for a reason. And it's maintained, but it's not it's not, certainly not kept at 6 inches. So she asked, what's the impact on me then? So one of the things we wanted to do is add a number 5 called garden and landscape features as determined by the township zoning administrator. Now, I don't know that provision necessarily touches on what you brought up, Larry, but part of that is adding some sort of a discretionary model to this, where it really is difficult to try to encapsulate all of these various what-ifs, and so we want to have some way where the zoning inspector has some level of discretion in those instances, some reasonableness and some, something of a common sense approach.
Okay, well, I hope you come up with it, because I have a hard time supporting this. If I got a 9-acre piece of property and I got to go mow I'm way at the back, like that house we just saw, and I've got to mow 50 feet from Dunham Road, and I got to mow 15 feet around all the edges. I think you'd have a hard time thinking that there wasn't a lot of the township non-compliant with this.
I would like to chime in on that too. And in my specific circumstance, to having 3.5 acres, and my neighbor abuts me, and he's got many more, but there's a large piece of woods, and where our property line is, it goes through the woods and it comes out into a field area. He doesn't cut that field area. I don't cut that field area. We can't take away from the fact that we want this area where we live in to stay as natural as possible. Right? So in this area, I wouldn't want to cut it just for the fact to cut it because of an ordinance, but I wanted to leave it because it's natural, whether it's prairie grass or whether it's just the wild field grass that would grow there. And plus, then we're also not adding to cutting something just to burn fuel, right? Because in some cases you may just be doing it. It might be just very wasteful. So I'm also interested in how that might, finally set.
And my concern is, it sounds like you and your neighbor have a kind of understanding of the maintenance of that area, but say somebody else moves in and they don't particularly, you guys have had some problem, and all of a sudden he's looking for ways to have problems with you, and he said, hey, look, he's not maintaining that, and then you got something that's clearly obvious that it was never expected to be maintained. Now somebody's being, because of the way this is written, forced to do something that doesn't make sense.
Great. Dave, my point on any of this mowing stuff in here is that they do not exceed 6 inches in height. I mow my lawn, which is sod at like 3 3/4, and in August sometimes 4 inches. And 6, and it looks right in a subdivision. It's not long. I'm curious on the 6 and how we got it, and are we hung up on 6 or not? Because 6 is pretty short, particularly when you get out of subdivision.
So, am I hung up on 6? Not necessarily. If it's 8, we came to 6 as something of it seemed like a pretty standard average among a lot of communities, which we did research. And this issue in particular, the grass cutting in particular, was one of the focal points of drafting this ordinance. We did do a lot of research on other communities, and 6 seemed to be the standard, and we went with it.
Yeah. It's short.
It really is short in some areas where it's a little more rural, or even case where I live. But if the grass is 10 inches tall or longer, it would almost take a tractor or some farm implement to really cut it.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, a lawnmower is not going to do it. And so even if you could adjust your deck all the way up, it would almost take farming equipment to cut something longer than that.
And I would agree. We have a few undeveloped lots left in our subdivision. We have cut them a couple times a year. Now, they certainly get over 6. Some people like them cut shorter, and some people don't care. So it's going to get into that personal preference thing on what's neat and groomed.
I'd be okay with going up to 8, because we did see some of that in other communities. I will say that, Tom, with what you're saying, different I agree that different circumstances might call for a more appropriate height. That might get even more confusing, though, if you're saying, all right, well, it can be 6 if in these instances, but it can be 8 in these instances. And, I mean, you can already see how it's kind of getting difficult to try to carve out these reasonable instances when we wouldn't apply any sort of mowing standards. If we started to try to start putting different tiers of vegetation height, I'd be concerned that would get even more confusing. So if going up to 8 inches is a way to find a middle ground there, then...
Well, so I think it's a combination of two things. One, is it really practical to tell people that have 5 acres that they need to mow a certain portion of it that's basically wild, versus I can see in a subdivision saying 6 inches, you don't want being over 6 inches. But I think the problem comes in when you start telling a person with 5 acres they got to maintain a certain portion of theirs around the perimeter. So did you find when you were looking through this that was pretty much the norm, that people were being required to maintain acreage sites?
We did find other instances where if you have your 5 acres, but then there's a sub right next door of 3/4 acre lots, let's say, and that's where number 4 here comes in, at least where your property abuts smaller residential lots, you have to maintain that so that you don't have an overgrown field butting right up against the nice tidy lawns of a residential subdivision. So that's what we tried to do with number 4. And at least tell you have to, when you're adjacent to lots less than 1 acre, you have to mow it back 50 feet. And if you have your 5 acres in the CA districts, regardless of who's next door to you, you have to mow it along the front, the sides, and the rear, just so you don't have that overgrown look, at least from the roadside or from your neighbors' sides. But I certainly understand your issues with number 3.
So you're asking us to cut the right-of-way too, then? Yeah.
Yes. So at least from the road, or at least from your neighbor's property lines on either side, it's not overgrown. If you want it to be overgrown around your house, that's more your choice.
The communities you looked at were in the rural to what we have here, however we would describe.
I mean, we looked.
A mix.
Yes.
Okay.
And I will say too that a lot of communities, and granted, probably some of the more suburban communities, say 6 inches, period. That's the end of the discussion. We did try to carve out some instances, because obviously we recognize that Hartland Township still has a lot of the rural character, and we want to be reasonable with how we apply this. We have a healthy mix of the rural acreage and the small residential lots, and I agree that there's more that can be done, but we were trying to find a reasonable approach to this without making it so overwhelming that it didn't make any sense at all.
David, I completely understand that part of it about it being too overwhelming, because you can see how it very well could get. To go back to where I was with what is proper, 6 or 10, and it was just a number that I used, the 10, right? I wasn't suggesting that. But I wonder if in the bullet that you're going to add number 5, if there can, and maybe you've already explained that, there can be just simply be room that this, a base-by-base circumstance can be worked out.
Well, yes, and I do want to come up with some sort of language that's still enforceable, that doesn't make, throw this all out. If we can add some discretionary language in here so that, because the zoning inspector will, regardless of how this shakes out, he will apply a certain level of reasonableness. And a lot of this is complaint-based. And if Larry's got his 5 acres out on the hillside and nobody ever complains, we're not necessarily out looking for overgrown grass. We look for it when somebody tells us about it and files a complaint. So that's the first tier is, we need to have that complaint. And then if we have that complaint, I would want, in addition to these instances that we're trying to encapsulate, a certain level of reasonableness on top of that, a certain level of discretion from the zoning inspector.
Yeah, the only problem with that is, then you're dealing with a bunch of gray, and, when is it, and this year, it is, but next year there's a different zoning administrator and the rules are different. I'm not a big fan of rules that are only rules when somebody, too much arbitrary discretion. Yeah, too much discretion.
Do we get I know we obviously deal with complaints. Do we get complaints on grass mowing and length of grass in the community?
In the residential subs, yes. And particularly, folks around here are pretty good, but particularly the houses that are for sale, or the undeveloped lots. Nobody's cutting the weeds down on the undeveloped lots. We get a lot of that. We don't get, frankly, out. In the rural areas, we don't get the one rural neighbor calling to complain about the length of the grass for the other rural neighbor, because everybody kind of understands the nature of that.
Could we go to defining the mowing based upon zoning districts, densities, the other way versus doing the CA? Could we define it as, the SRs, the MDR, all the more dense that are below CA?
Perhaps, other than we do have some denser, I shouldn't even use the word dense, but we do have some subdivisions that are still zone CA, where one reason or another we got 3/4 of an acre lots, developments that were approved prior to some of our acreage requirements of today. And that might be problematic, because now you're zone CA, but you have a 1 acre lot and your neighbor's not cutting his grass.
How about if we turned it over to encourage the homeowners association to take care of it?
Most homeowners associations do have requirements for keeping your grass cut, and a lot of times that's where you get the warning letter from your HOA president before you get the warning letter from the township. But there's also a lot of residential developments in the township that don't have an HOA, or the HOA isn't active, or the HOA isn't actively enforcing, and that's where we get the calls is my neighbor's not cutting his grass, and there's no homeowner association to go to.
Well, I wonder, Dave, if most of the complaints are actually in the more populated neighborhoods that, where everything's denser.
That I can certainly confirm they are.
And, well, that's good to hear, really. It's good, it's not good to hear that there's complaints or that they're not being maintained, but in regards to that, probably on that vacant piece of property, there's an owner of that piece of property. So wouldn't it be a path of less resistance to maybe go to that owner of that property and serve him with a complaint and ask him to get on a maintenance program to take care of that particular piece of parcel instead of, having to cover the whole township?
Well, you need the rule to tell him he has to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to need to say you have to take care of it because our blight ordinance says so. Because he's going to say, well, who says? Where does it say I have to cut that?
Okay, so
They're trying to lay some ground rules of this is what's acceptable and this is what's not. I think that's what...
Right. There has to be a rule in place for us to enforce.
But could you go with the zoning districts of less than CA, and I just can't recite all the letters right now, but and parcels of or parcels of 1 acre or less? If you've got subdivisions that are CA that have small parcels.
Perhaps. And if I were playing devil's advocate, the only response I would have is if you've got a subdivision right next door to a vacant field, and that vacant field is overgrown, and is there any need to protect those people from the undesirable things that come with overgrown noxious weeds?
Maybe people wouldn't like it if I picked the phone up, but my comment would be that vacant field was there when you bought your house.
And the grass was tall.
And the grass was probably tall. It's kind of like the guy who buys the house next to the freeway that was built in 1955 and now is complaining about the noise. I say, well, the freeway was there first. And maybe that's the wrong answer, but to some level you can't, I don't know, we're infringing on that rural element part in these larger parcels that I think you're going to have a hard time with if you try and go somewhere with it.
And so in an area where I live, where we have parcels that are they're owned by, but no one's ever built on them, and that are adjacent to other parcels, what happens is that neighbor just cuts onto that piece of property. And that happens, I think, probably in a lot of areas. So, and I'm not suggesting that anyone trespass or do that at all, but I just wonder if maybe the answer to it wouldn't be to go with a restriction on the smaller parcels, again, whatever they're labeled in the neighborhoods, if I can summarize with that. And I'm not saying to revisit this again, but maybe once that rule is in place, maybe you really won't have complaining or calls of complaints that come from the people that live in the larger settings, bigger parcels. Just address it for the small, the more neighborhood.
I'd suggest taking that back to your office or your staff and looking at the residential zoning with less than an acre or less, focusing on the subdivision where most of the complaints are, and throw out all the scenarios that you could possibly come up with and see if we can make that fit.
I will. I'll say it again. For whatever it's worth, we tried as many what-ifs with this as we could.
Well, yeah, but we're in a much bigger, broader picture to work with.
Sure.
Yep, but we're giving you that outside-in look.
Absolutely. No, I'm not complaining. Believe me. That's why we're doing this. We are. I hope you can appreciate that there are a lot of what-ifs.
There's a lot of words in here.
Yeah, I mean, and what you're trying to do is good. I hate to see it get, we're picking at this one section, and I hate to see it get held up because we're trying to do something that maybe we shouldn't be trying to get our fingers into, because the other stuff is way more important than this. I will say that in the right above number 1, above the word follows, you have 8(6).
You can see how we went back and forth on 8 or 6 issues.
Right? I see.
I wasn't kidding when I
There
said
was
that.
the flexibility part. My next question is on page 12.
And then 8.
Yeah,
Oh, you got an 8? Okay.
Comment.
Oh, I didn't get that. Well, I didn't catch something on it. All right, go for it.
But you looking through here under section 6, it talks about all the different nuisances. And we're worried about keeping the bumblebees or honeybees off the neighbors, and we're keeping horses and livestock. There's nothing about dogs. Do we have any ordinance about dogs? Living out by me, people, because they have a couple of acres, they think the dog can just run, and they end up in my yard.
So, a couple things about dogs. First off, there are standards in the zoning ordinance that will remain. Excuse me, I'm going to need some more water here in a minute. But there are standards for how many domesticated animals you can have based on the acreage of your property. We don't necessarily have a leash law. We don't necessarily have.
Well,
an
maybe
ordinance
this
that says
is
your
a
dog
good
has to be
place to
fenced
put
in.
it. You're worried about livestock and bees and horses. Can't we just add dogs?
We can talk about that. I imagine there may
picking
be.
up after other people's dogs.
And I've been there too. For me, it was the neighbors. For me, it was the neighbors' cats, and the cats doing what they do in my flower beds. But no, I can appreciate that. The counter argument to that would be is that the direction that we're going to go is that requiring anyone with a dog to have a fenced-in area. Some communities do that.
10 acres, that's what's going to happen.
Keith, I will tell you that I do know of, because it's happened in our neighbors. Neighbors have called on neighbors to animal control, and they do come, and they do visit the people. It's happened to several families in our neighborhood.
First of all, you kind of have to know where they're coming from, but in many cases, it's the same dog, so you
I think that's what happened. I don't know all the circumstances. I know the families that were visited. I don't necessarily know who called.
So animal control, and that's
They
through the
called animal
county?
control and how, and animal control then handled it.
Well, his answer isn't going to work, because there's no way people with 3 acres, 4 acres, 5 acres, they're not going to run electric for, invisible fences.
And I'm that person with those 3.5 acres and a dog, right, and a lab that likes to roam. So our system is I have a training collar for him. So that's how I keep
That's
him.
perfect. That's
That's
what
how I
it should
keep him
be.
at bay. But then I have a neighbor that wanted to let their dogs, be in the yard, so they made a little half-acre, not even that, maybe 50 by 50 fenced-in area. So to fence the whole property would, as you say, be unrealistic. But Dave, while you were gone, Larry mentioned that in his neighborhood that animal control's been called. And so there is a process already, for dogs.
Right. I did miss part of the conversation. I apologize. I've been fighting a little sore throat. And don't let me forget to speak to barking dogs, because that's another part of this conversation. Animal control, yes, if there's a wandering dog or a dangerous animal, that's when they get involved. They don't get involved typically in the barking dog situations. That's more of a nuisance, and that's more back in our realm. But the wandering dogs and the dog that's getting into your property and causing trouble and certainly posing a threat, that's where animal control should be called. If Keith, what you're getting for it is some sort of a requirement for containing dogs, I can certainly see some issues from people around here looking at that requirement.
Well, me too. I live out the 3, 5, 10 acre parcels. They're not going to be putting a visible fence around that. I mean, we have brought up a good point. You can pick a smaller area of your property to run them in.
And uniquely, they actually make them today that you don't have to bury the wire. So there's a central pod that actually sends out a beam. But again, there's lots of options.
I don't know. It sounds like you do have. We do, as township residents, have one option. That's called county.
Hey, we as a township don't get involved in the dog catching aspect of
Because
it.
you don't have any way to take care of it.
We don't have any of it. We don't have the vehicle. We don't have the training. We don't have.
You can knock on the door and tell them to keep the dog home.
All righty. What do you have on it?
So I'm done on Seth.
I had one on that question. It was actually, you already touched on it, Keith. And it was the keeping of bees. So I'm just curious about if we have complaints about keeping of bees. I have a small orchard myself, but I don't have bees. Bees are pretty important. They're pretty vital.
Absolutely.
If there was a complaint, it would be nice to find out where that complaint is derived. Maybe there's a neighbor that has an allergy to a bee sting, which is very, very common, right? And so maybe they just have to work on maybe relocating those bee boxes or something like that. So I am kind of curious about that.
So this is one where it does come up in, I can't say whether it's come up in my tenure in Hartland Township. I know it's come up in multiple other communities that I've had an opportunity to work with. And I agree bees are vital. And at the same time, though, they can be, when not properly maintained, they can become a problem for the neighbors. So we did include it in this ordinance just so we would have something to go by if it were to come up in Hartland Township. I will say that this is one where we looked at, and we as a staff agree that there needs to be some language, something to the effect of unless superseded by the zoning ordinance or the Michigan Right to Farm Act, because the zoning ordinance does speak to the keeping of insects in terms of agricultural use. So if you have the proper acreage and you're meeting the applicable GAMPs of the Right to Farm Act, then those would certainly supersede this. The idea here is that if there were someone that were keeping bees that weren't doing it in a responsible manner, we would have something to go by in citing them for it. It's not meant to preclude it. It's meant to, as you say, when such keeping results in a disturbance of safety, comfort, and repose.
So, Larry Fox decides he wants to have bees. And I live next door to Larry, and I have a kid who's allergic to bees, and I'm freaked out that he keeps bees, and I call you up to complain. Is he forced to get rid of his bees?
The way this is worded, the township would have to determine that Larry keeping his bees is a disturbance to the safety, comfort, and repose of you.
How do you do that?
That
whole term is so subjective.
I guess we would need you to demonstrate that there actually has been, that you're not just, I agree. If you as the neighbor, in filing your complaint, were able to demonstrate that there were a safety problem there, and it's not just because you don't like Larry or you don't like the fact that he's in his backyard tending the bees, we would have to take that under consideration. We would have to determine that there is a safety issue there.
Wait till the kid got stung.
I hate to put it that way, but perhaps. Yeah, it's the same thing as the animal control folks having to be subjective about whether that dog really is dangerous or not. They have training in that sort of thing, obviously, but in a lot of things there has to be a certain level of subjectivity.
Okay, well, just seems very difficult to me. I'm not saying that it isn't worthwhile, but I'm just saying
I would think
it seems tough.
Very, very seldom would occur because most beekeepers want to keep their bees away from people because the bees act and live much better away from people. And they have real defined areas that they're near water, near fruit or certain vegetation. So I wouldn't think that it happened very often where they come in contact with people that didn't want to be in contact with them.
So do you know offhand, I live on a half-acre piece of property. Can I keep bees?
The Right to Farm Act.
Well, I'm not selling anything, right? So the Right to Farm Act doesn't apply to me.
Okay, so you're not selling honey or any of that. Then we do have minimum acreage for keeping of animals, including the bees.
Okay.
And I believe it's 2.5 acres.
Okay.
Sounds like it's covered.
So I have a couple of things on that one. Right at the top of the page, after the word township clerk, there should be a period.
Township, yes.
And then the wording, the last sentence in that paragraph, just seemed really awkward to me in reading it. So if maybe you could just give that a couple reviews just to see. I'm not saying it has to go. I'm just saying it was awkward for me to read. And then nuisances, letter E. So in reading that one, could you say that a construction site be deemed a nuisance?
We do look at that in a little more detail. Let me find the section. There's a section that deals specifically with open wells and open foundations. And
Should probably reference that.
well, it's in here, and I'm looking at page 9. All right. Yes, section 6, page 9, starting with letter J, and then into letter K. And when we as a staff looked at that one recently, what we agreed was there has to be. We cite 60 days. What we want to say is 60 days of non-activity. So my point is that if it's an active construction site, obviously there's going to be a point in time where there is going to be an open foundation, and it's not reasonable to expect that every evening when the construction guys go home that they fence it off or that they cover it up. But if they go 60 days without securing an open foundation, then that's the trigger for treating it as a nuisance. And I think letter E within section 6 on page 8 could be more specific as far as that that non-activity.
Maybe that it should have a disclaimer on that this doesn't apply unless something, if it's superseded by the provisions of other ones. I mean, it seems like somehow it might want to be called out.
Okay.
Just say superseded by J and K.
Anything on 9, 10? 9 or 10?
I got something on 9, letter L. So after the word egress or ingress, I don't really understand what the wording, its windows to be glazed and locked or boarded up, its doors to be locked or boarded up and to prevent ingress and all of the portals. Because what these things here all are is definitions of nuisances, right? Or things that are identified as nuisances. And
yes.
Where it starts with the word "its" kind of sounds like a remedy for the nuisance, for it not to be a nuisance, rather than saying it is a nuisance.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. The intent of L is you can't have a wide open, unoccupied building with the windows and the doors all blown out. I will agree that the way it's structured is not consistent with the way the others are.
Page 10, anyone?
Yeah.
You got some on 9, Tom?
No, I'm sorry. No, I was next page.
Okay, 10.
10, I got something on Q. The end of Q and R are just a restatement of the same, it's the exact same wording. Starting with the word any.
Yeah, that may have been a cut and paste that went bad.
And then V is kind of the same thing as I think L, where responsible person shall remove the property, dispose of such in a timely manner. Again, it's a solution to the nuisance, not really a listing of what is a nuisance.
Page 11.
11, I had a question that was on number 4 regarding engines and operating of engines. And my only question there would be there's a time of day, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. when they can be used. And where we live, a couple times a year we're without power, so we have generators, and generators run throughout the night. And that can be considered a nuisance. I mean, according to this, even though everyone in the area has probably got the same generator running, so it shouldn't be a problem, but it might be nice to note in there somewhere for the generator use for power outages might be an exception.
Yeah,
Unless it's there and I'm...
No. What I will say to that is we looked at this section in particular, and we as a staff agreed that there needs to be some additional language speaking to, if you look at letter C, it speaks to emergency situations. And I think power being out and running a generator might be more of an emergency to some than to others. But my point is that we already agree that letter C can be enhanced to address things like that. Another example is if you look at letter R, and it speaks to the fact that you can't run a snowblower, for example, between after 8 p.m. you can't run your snowblower until 7 a.m. the next morning. That's not reasonable either if you think about it. I mean, if you got to be at work at 6 and the snow came in at 2 a.m., that's an emergency to you. It might not be an emergency to your neighbor who's listening to your snowblower, but we want to add additional language speaking to emergency situations, and I think running a generator, running a snowplow, running a snowblower, and some other things like that could be considered not necessarily an emergency, but certainly should have their own exceptions.
Well, and along with C, a house alarm blaring at night, which has happened in my house, right, because my kids might open the door and the alarm would go off. So that's emergency.
Yes, and that
going on.
And that's why C is there, and house alarms in particular. But I think there's other things that could be, whether it's including them with C or creating a letter E. But I agree, generators, snow blowers, snow plows, things where certain things have to be done in order to get yourself to work or keep the house running, keep the furnace on, those sorts of things.
Anything on 11 anymore?
I had just a general question on 11. So a lot of the wording in here uses the term about in your, implies in your house, if you're disturbed in your house. And then there's a couple of them that maybe talk about, in your... My question is, what about on my property versus in my house? If I'm in my yard and somebody is playing amplified music and disturbing my repose, does it not qualify as the same provisions as if I'm in my house? I mean, don't I have a right to be able to enjoy being in my yard as well?
Yeah, so we would want to look at then consistency there, whether it's if it's specific enough where it says, in any office, dwelling, hotel, hospital, or residence, if that implies that it only applies when you're inside the building, then we could word that better, because I think there needs to be some protection for if you're, on your back porch.
You may have tried to get it there on 1 when you said in the third line up, it has to be plainly audible on real property or in a dwelling unit. Other than that, from the noise originates. Yep. So on real property, you might be talking about on your property, but outside. How do you word that?
I mean, and that's what I read that one, but I don't think that same method
not all the way.
It needs to be consistent all the way through.
It is not consistent, but yes, I think that's where you tried to grab it. I have one on 12, Dave, and maybe it's just an adder thing, I'm not sure. Section 8C, following motorhomes, trailer coach, and watercraft shall not be deemed junk or abandoned vehicles or watercraft for purposes of this section. Vehicle, trailer, coaches when in a fully enclosed building. Well, obviously, you can't see it. The next one, vehicles, trailer, coaches, or watercraft kept as stock in trade by regularly licensed dealers in motor vehicles, trailer, coaches, or watercraft, or vehicles, trailer, coaches, or watercraft stored by a licensed junk dealer. While I would agree that if they're stored per an approved site plan, they're not considered bad, or if they're stock according to an approved site plan. So is there any value to adding something along the lines of you can have those as long as they're done according to an approved site plan? Otherwise, you could see like a car dealer just parking them all over the newly mowed 6-inch high field, and that isn't right. So I don't know whether that statement could be added or not, or should be added.
I think it should, and it could be with an approved site plan or consistent with the outdoor storage requirements of the zoning ordinance, one of the two.
Yeah, we have ways that we allow that all to happen. The question I have with that, though, is because it's the definition of junk. Well, I certainly wouldn't call a used car dealer that parks them on his mowed field the car's junk. But if it's another tool to allow you to do enforcement of not parking cars on the lawn, maybe it helps.
Yes.
Anything else on 12?
I got one. Do we have anywhere that gives a definition of a historic or classic vehicle? Do we need to do that? I mean, somebody could try to argue that you have a classic vehicle, even though it's really not.
It's a 67 Mustang without wheels.
Antiques are 25 years old, but I don't know that, someone's not calling it 5
I know, like Secretary of State, I'm sure, has classifications based on getting some plates for him, but
I think it's
was that
the
what you want to use, or is that what the intent was?
I'm not I'm not a classic car guy, so I don't know. Is that pretty standard if you do have a classic car? Is there a benefit to getting that designation from Secretary of State?
Yeah,
Like,
because you
some
can
sort of
get a plate that lasts
Lifetime, I think.
Yeah, like historic plates is a lifetime plate.
Okay.
I mean, you have to drive it only certain times, but
Yeah.
it has to be a certain age.
You can get the year of the car, like if it's a 1969 Mustang, this year you could get a 1969 Mustang plate. You know, you get an old
Is this the
plate.
first year you can get it, though? Is it, if it's a 1972, can you get it?
Yeah, oh yeah, I think you can get any old plate if it's considered historic. So the license plate itself would have 1967 or 72 on it.
Yeah. Is there is there a certain number of years it has to be before it can be deemed classic by the Secretary of
Well,
State?
I would guess that antiques are 25 years old. That's what I've always heard, but I don't know that that's it.
You may want to call them.
Yeah.
And then maybe make reference to that. I mean, some guy might have a custom-made car that he's working on or has made and sitting there, and he may say, well, it's a classic because it's a one-of-a-kind. I don't, they argue. Point.
Dave, I got one that kind of spans probably more page 13 and 14, but maybe it's in the ordinance elsewhere. It's the unit of measure that we're defining time by. For example, on page 13, section 9, paragraph B, we define the time as a 3-day limit. In paragraph D, we call it a 10-day period. In paragraph E, we call it 48 hours. And I wonder if there's a reason that we do or don't want it to always be measured in days.
You just mean it's not necessarily the amount of time that you're asking. It's the
No.
terminology like days versus period versus hours?
Should it be consistent or not?
Yes, I think it should.
And also in paragraph E, it says, 4th line up. I'll start the 5th line up. The township or its agent may dispose of said vehicle, trailer coach, or watercraft at the township dump.
Yeah. Last I knew, we don't have a township dump. So, no, we're already on that one, and we're just going to say, the township may remove or dispose of the vehicle, period. We don't need to say where.
Right.
Yeah, great.
And that comes up again in the second paragraph.
Yeah,
Or later in that same paragraph.
yeah, it's in there twice.
We're just going to take out the part about at the township dump, just because.
Yeah.
Page 13 also has a typo, paragraph B, about the 5th line down. It says, if the line limit is other than 3 days.
Can you tell me again, Larry, where
Right after the word blight.
Yeah, 1,
at the top of 15?
3,
No.
4, 5, 6th line down
Section B.
in section B,
Oh, I'm on the wrong page then.
page 13.
Page 13, I'm sorry.
Section B.
Yes, I already have that one.
Okay.
Time instead of line. Thanks.
Another unit of measuring time.
Yeah.
That's all.
That was a combination of time and line. Line.
There you go. Timeline. Short.
Anybody else have anything?
You're looking forward to ask us for an opinion next time?
It's all
This is all good input. It really is. And again, this is what we want. We want to get as many perspectives as we can.
All righty, let's move on to C, and we'll turn it right back over to David, our work program.
Thanks again. So, cover letter dated March 6, 2014, where I explain what we're working toward here, and that is finalizing the Planning Commission's work program for 2014. This started with discussion at the last meeting, the work session, and there was a lot of good discussion had at that meeting. And I did my best, and this is very draft work program, so that's why we're here, is to discuss it. But my best effort in encapsulating what I heard at the work session on February 27th was the Planning Commission is going to tackle 3 major projects this year. The most major of those being a update to the comprehensive plan, taking a look at the amendments to the sign regulations, section 5.26 of the zoning ordinance, and the Parks and Recreation master plan. And so I tried to give the Planning Commission as much information I could in terms of a description of the project, the organizations that are going to be involved in the planning process, and there's probably more that can be added to those respective lists, the resources that are available to help us along those processes, and the projected due date as determined by the Township Board's comprehensive plan, which I also included a copy of in your packet. I mentioned that the comprehensive plan is probably the most ambitious of those tasks, and we had a discussion at the work session on February 27th of doing everything in our power to reutilize the material within the existing comprehensive plan that's still valid, updated as necessary, but kind of use that as the foundation for the 2015 plan. And so I tried to summarize that both in this draft work program, in the cover memo, and then also the draft request for proposals. This is the draft of the RFP that will eventually and hopefully rather soon go out to prospective planning consultants. But included in this is what the staff has put together in terms of a scope. And I guess this is where I want to have some discussion, is whether this scope is what this Planning Commission envisions as part of the comprehensive plan. At our February 27th work session, what I heard was bring us back a scope and we will look at it and decide whether we want to add to it, take away from it, enhance it. And so that's what I'm trying to do here is take the first crack at generating a scope and formatting it as part of the eventual RFP. So that's what I'm hoping to get some feedback from the Planning Commission this evening is, does this scope look like what the Planning Commission envisions for an updated 2015 comprehensive plan? And once we have that discussion, we can talk a little bit about where, at this very early stage, we see us heading with the amendments to the sign regulations. And the Parks and Recreation plan is relatively straightforward. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources has a guideline of here's everything that must be included in a Parks and Rec plan in order for it to be certified by the DNR. So the intent of the township is to meet those certification requirements so that our Parks and Rec plan will be eligible for DNR grant funding.
Can I just make a quick comment about the work program draft here? Larry, I thought we discussed that the ORC committee was going to continue to try to work on some of the ordinances questions that Clear Zoning brought up. Is that true or not?
The Planning Commission discussed it.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's hearing us, but yes, we have discussed that.
Well, let's talk about that. My intent in this is not hearing you. I want to have that conversation this evening, too, because we do need to come to a resolution on that. What I advocated for, and I'll advocate again tonight, is I've taken a few more looks at that list. I don't see anything on there that really jumps out at me as anything that is of high priority. And these projects that we have here, I certainly think are of high priority. And the other thought I have is, if we are going to do the comprehensive plan this year, and the comprehensive plan establishes the vision that we have for Hartland Township, and the zoning ordinance is then the tool that we use to implement that vision, then it makes sense to me to do the comprehensive plan first and get that established, and then go back and take a look at the zoning ordinance and determine what, if any, changes need to be made to better implement that vision. I apologize if when this came up at the Planning Commission on February 27th, if the impression I got was mixed, but if I heard that, yes, we absolutely want to tackle what remains on that clear zoning list, that's not what I heard, and maybe I wasn't listening as well as I could have been.
Well, my concern is that, and I don't want to take away from the time from the Planning Commission's work that's going to be needed for those 3 other items on this. I know your office is probably going to be a little more burdened if we take on the zoning questions. But the ORC can work in parallel. We meet other nights, so we're not really going to interfere with any Planning Commission group meetings, work session meetings to work on these other items. And I think because the Township Board has been looking at and know they're out there and expecting us to try to correct those, we should at least include those on there, on this draft here, or works program, and tell them that we will work on those. The ORC committee will continue to work on those throughout the year. I'm not saying that maybe we necessarily have to commit to a certain number, but I think we need to let them know we know they're out there and we're thinking about them and we want to take care of them. Am I speaking for myself, or is that kind of what you think? I'd like to see it on here. I know that
I can't answer you. I mean, I've voiced my opinion on it before. The thing that I think is worth noting is that the ORC can't really accomplish that task on their own.
correct.
And it's going to require time from staff to work on that. And if staff is busy with the other things, even though the meetings of the ORC may not conflict with the meetings of the Planning Commission or the work of the Planning Commission as a whole, it can't really accomplish anything without the work of staff. And if the staff doesn't have the time to put into it, it really can't accomplish anything.
And I understand that. I think early on I mentioned that to Dave, that I understood that was going to be part of the problem. And I don't have a problem if he feels that the staff can't support that fourth item, then that's fine. So, but at least the Township Board has an answer if they come to us and say, how come you're not working on any of these ordinance issues, ordinance questions? And it sounds like a legitimate answer, but at least everybody is aware of that we've looked at it, we wanted to work on it, but with the comprehensive plan is going to take up a lot of time, and the rest of these items on this schedule.
I agree. The items on this list will take up a lot of time. I don't want the message to be that the items on that list can't get done because staff doesn't have the time or staff doesn't want to do them. What I will say is that staff and myself in particular have looked at that list more than a few times, and none of them jump out at me as being of a high enough priority to commit ourselves to them. Now, if this Planning Commission wants to look at that list and tell me, Dave, numbers 16, 24, 32, and 41 have to be looked at because they're important, then I'm open to that discussion. But I look at that list and I don't see any, and I said the same thing when I looked at that list a year and a half ago, I don't see any that warrant the commitment and the resources that the 30 that we did warrant. But I'm open to other opinions. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard, here are the ones that we really have to take a look at.
Well, so I guess the thing that I would say in response to that is, if they're not of importance, I would rather see us say we're not doing them, and have the check mark that we've done everything we're going to do with this list, than there to be ones that just, well, they're an issue, but they're not. I mean, so maybe if we went through and did that, there's like 18 or something on here. Maybe then if we went through that and you got rid of 16 of them or 15 of them, and you only had 3 left that you were ever going to deal with, at least then you've got it closer to the job being completed. But I'm not going to continue to beat that. I mean, there was a couple that I had seen, but without looking at their issue, I can't tell if they're that high priority. And maybe you've looked at that issue to see. But I mean, when it says update definition of electronic sign, I mean, we don't allow electronic signs here, and I'm concerned if there is some ambiguity in that, some loophole in that would make us vulnerable for that. So that is a concern. But without knowing what that issue is, I don't really know whether I would say it's a high priority or not. There's one in here about the residential design standards. And I remember back years ago that McKenna told us we needed to deal with this, and we never did. And maybe we never did because it was not an issue, because what I remember that it really has more to do with platted subdivisions. But it seemed to me that some of the standards, even for site condo, reference those design standards. So that was, still something that had to be looked at. And then there's one in Article 7 that actually is labeled as high priority, which maybe we've dealt with that one, I don't know. It talks about the general provisions, but it's not checked off as being done, and Birchler Arroyo identified it as a high priority. Maybe it was so high that we took care of it before the thing was even completed, I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that I would at least think that, I wouldn't mind the Ordinance Review Committee meeting and just talking about these things with you and what you've evaluated, so that we can say, okay, this isn't an issue. Birchler Arroyo, you were wrong. We're not going to deal with this. And having answers to those questions so that we have a more feeling that we've completed what they've identified as issues. That's...
And I'm all for it. We are, and this is one of the things I want to talk about when I get to the planner's report, is we are going to have a meeting with the Ordinance Review Committee on these sign regulations, and maybe part of that is the electronic sign one. But that discussion could also be going one by one through those remaining issues and having that discussion, and in anticipation of that meeting, we as a staff could develop a list of, here's the remaining ones, here's our thoughts on them, and then the Ordinance Review Committee has an opportunity to chew on those, and then come back to this Planning Commission and say, there's 18 of them, we decided that 4 of them, 6 of them, 3 of them need some attention. That's my thought on the approach. Is that...
I'd be comfortable with that.
Okay.
Dave, what's the difference between where you say update a master plan and create a new plan? A new plan is an updated plan. Is the path or the track or the things we need to do, the meetings we need to have, is it any different to update versus have a new? And is there a difference? Because isn't updating making it new?
Well, what I don't foresee us doing is something comparable to the amendment that got done in 2011. I don't think it's best to have a second amendment to the 2004 document. I would like the outcome of this to be a new master plan, a 2015 comprehensive plan. That said, I agree that there is a lot of bones with the existing 2004 master plan that could be the skeleton of this new plan rather than starting from scratch. In terms of the number of meetings, it would be probably closer to doing a new plan than it would be to doing an amendment to the existing plan. Obviously, I wasn't here when the 2011 amendment was done, and so I can't speak firsthand to the public participation in the meeting processes that went along with that. But I foresee what we want to do this year being more substantial than that, perhaps less substantial than if we were starting completely from scratch.
When you open it up and you have public hearings, are you just advertising the change? Do you have to rehash the 90% that we keep? Is it, how does that happen?
I think we would be taking this to the public as the 2015 plan, and in that sense, presenting it as a new document with the understanding that a lot of the content is updated content from the 2004 plan.
I understand your approach, and I'm comfortable with it as far as calling a new plan and utilizing some of the backbone of the original, because I think it's still appropriate. However, I'm not sure that the scope that you put in this RFP, and I've written some RFQs in the past, and I've read a lot, and the actual scope hasn't jumped out at me in this yet, but I don't see anywhere that it really reflects in here that you're looking to take pieces of the existing document and reuse where appropriate. But in order, if I was a vendor, I came in here and I read this and I said, oh, you want to create a plan, I'd be getting my pencil sharpened and I'd be saying, oh, you want a whole new plan. So the cost is going to be completely different than utilizing some of the information we already have. That's just a quick look at it. That was my...
Fair enough. Let me say this way. As far as this RFP, what we as a department try to do here is bring this to the Planning Commission as kind of the high end of pretty close to a new plan, and give you as a Planning Commission the opportunity to pare it back if you see any ways to do so. If there's any elements of this that go beyond what you envision accomplishing this year, our thought was to aim high a little bit and give you the opportunity to say, here's some areas where we could see it being scaled back, or pick and choose things that you think the 2004/11 plan already address adequately.
Well, having not read it here in the last month, but remembering it quite well, I'd be surprised if we change 20% of it. We'll go change some data, and we'll go look at special planning area, Clyde Road and Bergen Road, if we want to look at a couple of that. But, geez, I don't know, a lot of it is who and what we are, and I don't know how you really change that, because I don't think there's been this monumental shift in the community. You're not going to change the historical part, all the talks of the natural features and all. You're not going to change any of that. We're not going to really change the direction of the community. So I'm thinking a lot of this stays. Now, maybe I should have read it from cover to cover before tonight's meeting, but I've always felt that it was a pretty good document, understanding the need for some updates. And
I think some key enhancements, some key additions that we would want to see this time around is more of an implementation strategy. I think if our comprehensive plan lacks in any most significant way, I think that's part of it. I also.
Can you explain that, what you mean by that?
So I think our existing comprehensive plan says what we want to accomplish, but I don't know that there's necessarily a 5-10-year implementation strategy, that within 5 years we're going to establish this, within 3 years we're going to establish that. You do see that oftentimes in these planning documents, so that we have some benchmarks for some things that need to be accomplished, so that you don't get that plan that gets adopted and then doesn't get utilized as much as it could, because there isn't that scheduling and that implementation timeline that goes with it.
So in what types of things would we be looking to implement? I mean, certainly we wouldn't be implementing the special planning area and putting a timeline for that, because that's going to be on somebody coming here and wanting to develop that. The research PD research area up at Clyde Road, we're not going to do anything to develop that. It's development driven. Unless we're totally changing the way we do business, that the township is going to start buying property and create our own industrial complex and sell,
Right. I don't know that it's that. It's more if the recommendations of the comprehensive plan are a capital improvement plan, for example, then we want to have that done within a certain time frame and redone every, in certain cycles. Parks master plan, if comprehensive plan could say that as an implementation, the new Parks master plan has to be adopted within a certain time frame and then updated every 5 years. If let's talk about the Hartland Village, for example. If some of the recommendations of the updated master plan are considering form-based code or considering other sorts of design and development standards and new sections in the zoning ordinance that would pertain strictly to the Hartland Village area, then there would be an implementation strategy for how you get to that point. You establish the zoning ordinance, you establish the zoning district, you establish the design guidelines, and you do these within certain time periods.
So then
those are just off the top of my head things of implementation strategies that could be scheduled out.
So then does your master plan dictate your strategic plan then? I mean, because that's sounding kind of like what you're talking about. If you start putting in your master plan, you're going to develop a form-based code for the village within 5 years. Well, that kind of sounds sounds like a strategic plan type of element.
I think there is going to need to be some coordination there, but I think if it's established in the comprehensive plan that we want to have this done, whatever this is, by 2016, then that needs to then be targeted in the strategic plan as we start getting closer to that year. The other component that I could see being new and I think critical to this comprehensive plan is an economic development plan and recommendations. I don't know that we have that, or at least in good detail, within the existing comprehensive plan. And I know that's something that we've spoken to the township manager about is having an economic development plan. That could be a component of the new comprehensive plan, and then that could also be something that could be part of the implementation strategy, is that the township will, by this year, look at this aspect of economic development, and by this year we'll accomplish this in terms of economic development strategies.
Well,
That being said, if you're hearing things that go beyond what you envision being feasible and advisable in the next year as part of this effort, then I need to hear that, and I think our township board needs to hear that.
Well, I think you put this RFP out, what's your realistic date that you're going to get anything back from people? How long you got to give them?
Usually you give them, 4 weeks.
Okay, so a month. So let's even say it can go out April 1st. That's May 1st. Then how long do you take to make a decision?
Usually another month.
So then you're down.
I mean, you do interviews and you.
Yeah, now we're to June 1st, and we have a deadline of March 15th. I can't imagine even doing an update by March 15th, let alone a new plan with an economic plan, with a this plan and a that plan. I just don't know how all that could possibly be done. I'm very concerned about the workload and the timeline. I mean, if the township has to have a new master plan, it has to have a new master plan. But let's be realistic about the workload and the timeframes that we're trying to get this done. I would hate to waste a lot of money with consultants just retyping and formatting a lot of a good document. I'll make that second piece of information. On the other hand, if we need a new master plan, we need a new master plan. But how this, you'd almost have to agree to that before you throw the scope of this project out.
Wouldn't it be more appropriate if you wanted, and I could see if you may want to include an economic development plan in the comprehensive plan, but wouldn't it be more appropriate to put a timeline in that economic development plan as opposed to forcing the timeline from the comprehensive plan? Did I lose you?
Maybe a little.
Well, if you have this economic development plan, you would think that they'd have a timeline that they wanted to work in to force themselves to follow to get this economic development to take place. So if there's already a timeline in the economic development plan, why would we have to also include a timeline in the comprehensive plan? Say updated every 5 years. Couldn't the economic development plan say that? It'll be reviewed in 5 years, every 5 years?
Yeah, I think the implementation strategy that I speak to, though, would have different components within that, and one of those components would be economic development, and then there would be implementation strategies under that tier.
So, do you envision this master plan, I mean, from what you're describing to me, this master plan looks a lot different than the master plan we have right now. Not necessarily in land use differences, but in the organization and what it tries to actually accomplish. Is that?
Yes, that's fair. I mean, I think what I'm hearing from the township manager, what he's hearing from the board, is that he wants the comprehensive plan to be broader. That he doesn't want it to just be a land use plan. He wants it to truly be, the board and the manager, and this is the direction I'm getting, is the comprehensive plan should be broader in scope and should encompass all of these other planning initiatives, and that it should truly be the vision for the township, not just in terms of land use, but in terms of economic development and housing and capital improvements and parks and all these various components.
I don't say that I wouldn't say that I disagree with what you're saying, and I think that's probably a fair summation of what I've heard discussion at the board and from James and what his belief of what a master plan should be. It's different than what our master plan is. And I think that the timeline that's been put on this, as Larry said, may be too aggressive, because I think there's a lot of education that would have to go along with this. If now you're looking for the planning department or the planning commission to weigh in on economic development strategies, who here raises their hand that's an expert on economic development strategy? So either, somebody's going to bring them to us and we're going to say, okay, it sounds good to us because you know what you're talking about, or we're going to have to take some time to try and understand what the strategies are and whether we agree with them or not. And so that kind of would concern me a little bit. Not saying it isn't a good endeavor. I'm just saying that because I think that's probably what you're hearing from the Planning Commission is they're thinking of the master plan we have right now, and the changes that need to happen aren't that drastic because they're thinking of it as basically a land use tool. And what you're saying is there's a lot of other things that we need to bring in. There's some aspects of land use that we have to look at, as we've all said. Majority of the land use probably isn't changing, but there's a lot of other elements to what the master plan should be that ours isn't.
Okay.
Are we going to discuss this RFP any further detail, or, I got a couple of issues with it, but...
Well, my overall comment is, as best I understand it, it's hard for me to conceptualize even getting all this done.
Right.
So,
if they're public
this is
meetings,
what
then-
wants to get thrown out there, and this is what wants to come back, we'll see what happens. And I don't mean to be that way of it, but I just cannot possibly imagine getting this done in what is going to amount to probably about 8 or 9 months. It's just not even, it'd be tough to do the plan that we know today in 8 or 9 months. And that's my concern with it.
Well, if you put it out, if you put the RFP out tomorrow as it is, I'd have a hard time understanding as a vendor what they wanted, but, some of this stuff looks like it's more appropriate for the Planning Commission to be doing, not a comprehensive plan builder. He's talking about redoing the special districts, special use districts. That's identifying them or changing them. That's not really the comprehensive plan's responsibility. That's the Planning Commission's, right, responsibility. And I've heard a couple of different times, I've heard this community branding, but we need to make sure they understand. I know it's kind of a new term, the new buzzword in the area, and they may be aware of what it is, but I'm still trying to catch up what it is. But if you're going to include that in the quote, you want to make sure that they explain what this community branding is, so people that pick it up and read it will understand it.
Yeah, part of it, the township has established our brand and to some degree, but part of the comprehensive plan would be kind of taking that brand and incorporating it into our long-range vision for the township.
Have you at all taken this and put a timeline to it?
Part of it would be, we would be, and this isn't unusual, asking the consultant as part of their RFP to show how it would schedule out. That said,
Did we tell them I can't recall if we told them that we wanted it done by March
I thought it said the end
2015.
of 2015 somewhere.
It's March 2015, but
The board's strategic plan calls for March of 2015. That's what, as we sit here right now, that's the anticipation.
Well, that on top of a park plan, on top of a zoning ordinance amendment for signs, on top of regular business, is a lot of work.
I just couldn't agree more.
And I will say it today as I said it 2 weeks ago. I just don't know that it's even, I just don't even know if it's possible. I'll go that far. I don't know if you could have enough meetings by the time you pick a consultant to March to get it done. Understanding we need to do it, and I'm not opposed to doing it. I just don't think the timeline is realistic. And we don't even have it yet. But just having worked on these things before, it's a lot of work.
It might be easier to rebuild the one from scratch as long as they include the items we want.
I think we probably are and will. They'll take it and they'll reword it, reformat it.
It's still going to take time.
But you still are going to have to go through it all, and when you open it up with these community engagement meetings, you're going to be rehashing the same old stuff again. Right. And you're going to get into a discussion about stuff that has been the way it is and the way it will always be, but it's part of the process.
I think I've gotten enough feedback to take back to James and to the board, and we'll be back here on March 27th, and with maybe a more firm idea of where we go from here.
I have just one other question on this proposal evaluation portion in your paragraph.
Yes.
Go through the list of different things that you're looking for from them. Should we ask them what they're going to be using for references in certain situations, or is there only a couple out there that they'd be using? Like census, for example, is obvious.
Yes.
Is there other surveys and other study groups that they might use to help build some of the information in the comprehensive? And is that pertinent to us?
It would be.
Would it help us decide on what to stay away from this company as opposed to another? I don't know.
It would be good to know what resources they have available in terms of their background, data collection, and analysis. And I think that's reasonable to ask as part of their their submittal criteria.
You know, Dave, we occasionally, somewhat annually, have meetings with a joint meeting with the board.
Yes.
And this could be the opportunity to have a meeting with the board.
We're on the same page there.
Maybe we just need to understand. Everybody needs to understand each other, because we have a great working relationship, and I'm sure if they hear what we're saying and we hear what they're saying, we can come up with something that everybody can work with.
I mentioned that to James, and I don't think he's opposed to that idea, and it's something we really should be doing anyway. So
yeah, maybe we could float that out there and see if there's an opportunity to do that.
Normally I would take, if that's what the Planning Commission desires, I think that would be my role as the board's representative to take that message to the board. And I'm more than happy to do that. I just want to, the board has a meeting this Tuesday. I'm actually at a conference. I won't be there. So if you want to contact the supervisor and maybe discuss it with him, if you figure it can't wait for another a couple of weeks after that, I'm fine with that.
So do you have a target date in mind?
I assume
a board meeting night, if nothing else. A regular
Well, usually when we've had joint meetings, they've usually been on our night, on the Planning Commission's night,
Okay.
because usually, it's usually always been at the request of the Planning Commission to have a joint meeting, or, I mean, I don't know that it really kind of been talked about and we decided to do it, but it's kind of been always viewed that the board is coming to the Planning Commission's meeting to meet with them, kind of thing. I don't know why, it just always seems that was the way they did it in the past and the way they kept doing it.
Okay.
So do you want me to call? No, okay. Okay, Dave, did we have much more on the work program?
Okay, so I think everything I'm hearing is sufficient to give me something to go back and work on more in terms of finalizing this work program and taking another look at this scope and having conversations with some of the other folks in Township Hall and get a better idea of how far we really want to take this thing and take it within the time that we have available to us.
So I had a couple things, I guess, in that same vein. So you have some meetings with the business community, a couple of different types of meetings. So one of them is coming up like on the 24th, it seems to me, at like, and I think this one might be on the signs. Is that right? Is that
If we're talking about the same meeting, it's April 29th. That's going to be my planner's report.
well, I thought there was something on the 24th.
Okay, on the 24th. A couple things on the 24th. One is we're having meetings with our major developers, and one of those is going to be on March 24th.
Okay.
And that's going to be with Mr. Urick from Hartland Town Center. The other meeting on the 24th that I can think of, and I can look at my calendar too, is the Safer Roads and Pathways Task Force meeting that evening.
Some of these meetings, I think it would be important that the Planning Commission knows about. And
we haven't gotten to the planner's report.
well,
No, I'm not trying to be...
I agree. And I think the truth is that they should already know about them.
Okay.
And, maybe, I don't, and I mean, I talked with James at the admin meeting about this. And, the board and staff is sometimes, I think, doesn't necessarily realize the vantage point of other people that are involved. Because they're so close to it, they don't realize that other people are farther away, if you know what I mean. So that, we all may be communicating that these meetings are going on, we're putting these meetings together. Then, after everything is all put together, we throw on somebody's plate, we're having a meeting this date. And I think maybe we should be a little bit better in informing people that we're working on these initiatives and what we're targeting, if that's making sense.
It is. I need some clarification on which meetings we're talking about, because, and it is in my planner's report, the meeting on the sign amendments where we want to do public input, we just this week kind of targeted a date for that. And so me bringing it to the Planning Commission's attention tonight is the first chance I've had to do so.
That one's April 1st, right?
April 29th.
Never mind.
The meetings with the major developers, and again, it's something I'm going to get to, those have been getting scheduled this week as well. So, and that's on my list of things to discuss about. So, I would like to think I'm telling you as soon as I know. And I can't think of any other meetings that are out there that are scheduled and are definite, that I've been remiss in keeping this planning commission informed.
No, and I would agree with you. I just think that maybe we should follow that up with something in writing, So I'm sitting here through a 2.5-hour meeting in the last, you're telling me, we're doing this on this date, this on this date, this on this date. So unless I'm, writing all that down, maybe I'm remembering it, maybe I'm not. So maybe some of that stuff should be put in writing and forwarded on to the Planning Commission, other than just in the minutes of this meeting, which, it may be a week before they actually are out or something like that. So I think it could probably be a little bit more in writing to them. Because I think those things are, I would see that the meetings with the developers, well, those, I don't know if the intent was for planning commissioners to come to that or not, but if we're going to be working on a strategic plan that's going to try and incorporate those things that we're learning, maybe some planning commissioners might want to come to those.
Okay. If we're ready for the planner's report, I'm ready to talk about that very thing.
They can.
Hold on, I had one other thing. And then as far as the work on the park master plan, we had spoken at the admin level. Is that maybe more of a committee that then reports back to the planning commission than rather a hands-on, all planning commissioners are?
I think the parks plan, while it does need to get to the planning commission and have a public hearing, I would agree that a lot of the heavy lifting on a park plan is going to be done not so much by this body, but by staff, by the Department of Public Works, having meetings with the Park Site Plan Committee, and I know we talked about establishing a Parks Task Force, not unlike the Safer Roads and Pathways Task Force. I know that was an idea.
Yeah, I know James said that was very successful for the Pathways thing.
But I think that idea is still kind of being formulated, but if that's the route we want to go, and I think it's a good way to go, then just like the Safer Roads and Pathways Plan, I think that group would kind of champion the Parks Master Plan, and by the time it got to the Planning Commission, it would already be starting to gel. But that said, I know that Parks Task Force was an idea that we're still, I think it was a new idea that's still formulating. I know we want HIA to be involved, the Park Site Planning Committee. With the Parks Plan, there's a lot of groups with their own and then the collective interests, and everybody needs to be here with that, the schools. So I think a lot of those meetings are going to be held at a committee level as opposed to meetings of the full planning commission.
Okay. That's something James will take care of?
I hope so. As far as establishing that committee?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar as...
It is appropriate for him to do it.
Yeah, he with assistance from Planning and Department of Public Works and Communications Department, formulated the Safer Roads and Pathways Task Force.
Right.
And I do agree that has been a favorable approach, and so I think we would kind of mimic that approach with developing a Parks Task Force committee.
Well, that's probably happened soon too then.
Yes.
Because if we take the same path the Safe Roads did it, even with an aggressive schedule, it takes a few months.
Yes.
Okay, are we a planner report?
Anything left?
Yeah, not for me yet.
Losing it twice.
Yeah. All right, April 29th, 8 a.m. If it's not set in stone yet, we want to talk to the Township Board about it on April 1st. But we are targeting that date as a public input session for our business community and also as many residents as we can get who have an opinion on signs who want to come, to have a public input session on the sign regulations, and particularly those areas of the sign regulations that we have already have started focusing on. And as a reminder of what those are, it's home-based businesses and perhaps allowing some additional signage for your home-based business depending on your acreage and your zoning district and your location. Looking at allowing some sort of sandwich board signs for the businesses in the village, just based on some of the unique characteristics of the village and whether those types of signs may be appropriate just within that district. Looking at donor recognition signs for public and quasi-public facilities, and looking at some maybe exceptions to signage or some special provisions for agritourism businesses, the cider mills and the apple orchards and the corn mazes and the haunted forests and things like that, the things that I think we all appreciate and the things that kind of maintain the township's rural heritage, and allowing some different types of signage for those types of businesses. We as a staff have not dived too deep into any of those yet, because our first step is we want to take a brief memo to the township board on April 1st and say, here's the ones that we're looking at. Do we have the board's support in looking at these in particular, and are there any other ones that the board wants to look at in particular? We would follow that up with a meeting with the Ordinance Review Committee in early mid-April and say, again, here's the ones we're looking at, here's some other ideas we have, but we don't want to take it too far without your buy-in. And then once we have the feedback from those bodies, then we have that public input session with the business community on the morning of April 29th. And we hopefully get as many business owners as we can in the room, and we start talking about all these things.
Well, if those are your topics and that's your advertising, I don't think you're going to get that many business owners, because you're not talking about signs that affect the business.
I will agree that a lot of those signage areas that we want to look at don't touch 99% of your businesses along M59 and US 23. That said, I think anytime that the township says we want to talk to you about signs, I think we will get some attendance. And in addition to discussing those 4 topics and whatever other topics emerge based on our meeting with the board on April 1st, based on our meeting with the Ordinance Review Committee, we will open it up and say, here's our chance. What else is in the sign regulations that you as a business community think the township should feel compelled to take a look at? Take that feedback back to the Ordinance Review Committee, back to the Planning Commission, back to the board, and we go from there. The Michigan Association of Planning is having their Spring Institute 2 weeks from today, March 27th in Lansing. I know Kim Shershlick in my office is going to attend that. I may or may not, depending on how our agenda for the 27th that evening looks. My point is that any Planning Commission members who are interested in going, there is still some money available in the education and training budget. I can get you a copy of the agenda for the session on the 27th. Let me know if you want to attend. A couple new businesses just to make you aware of in the township. Over in the plaza that currently has the Eagle Express and the Cash for Gold place, there is a new print shop moving in there called the One Stop Shop. They do printing and shipping, kind of like a small local UPS store. And then there's also in the Hartland office plaza, going the other way toward the east end of the township along M59, there's a medical licensed therapeutic massage business going into one of the small suites in there. As I touched on earlier, the Safer Roads and Task Force Committee will be having a meeting on Monday, March 24th. That's the meeting where the task force is going to meet with the individuals around the township that we've identified as being the key influencers. The township came up with a list of around 200 people that, for one reason or another, have the ear of a good number of people in the township. We sent out a copy of the draft road plan to all of those folks, and the opportunity is for those folks to come to that meeting with the task force on the 24th and give their opinion on the Safer Roads and Pathways plan as we get closer to really ramping that up for public promotion and public involvement. Around the same time, we're going to be doing telephone surveys. Not we, but we have a polling consultant that's going to work with us on that. So you may or may not get that phone call, depending on if you're one of the random winners. But that's going to be happening the last week of March. We're going to do some phone polling and really try to get an idea of what the voters are thinking about where we're at with that roads and pathways plan up to this point. The meetings with the major developers. This was identified in the township's strategic plan for 2014 to happen in the spring. We, at this point, have identified 5 major developers. It's the folks at Ramco, the folks at Showstack, who are now managing the Hartland Marketplace, the Red Olive and the Dollar Tree, that plaza there. The shops at Walden Woods folks, Frank Krause and his team. Mike Urick, who's the owner of Hartland Town Center. That's Jets Pizza, that plaza in there. And then the representatives from Mr. Pellerito, Lakeside Oakland Development LLC, who owns the vacant 30 acres on the southwest corner of M59 and Old 23. Those are the 5 we've identified. The idea is that they come in individually and have a meeting with myself, the township manager, the township supervisor, and as many members of the township board and the planning commission as we can get in the room, and just talk to them about what needs to happen and what could the township potentially do to see your developments build out in the next 5 or so years. That's what the idea of those conversations is. We've definitively scheduled 2 of those so far. I do know, Larry, one of them is on the 24th. The other one I want to say is on April 2nd, but I will confirm that with the Planning Commission. We're always going to be shooting for around 4 o'clock with those, because that's the time that at least members of our board have indicated when they're most available. But the idea is to schedule 5 of those before the end of April, and we've got 2 of them scheduled thus far. And we've reached out to the other 3, and they've said they're interested, and we're just trying to get to the point where we're hammering out some dates, nailing down some dates. Any questions on that in particular? Okay. Another planning initiative that the township is tackling this year is the capital improvement plan, and you as a planning commission have had an opportunity to give your preliminary thoughts on that. That's where we sent out a list of potential projects and said what year, if any, would you want to see these accomplished. Now that the township has narrowed down that list to the ones that we think the board and the planning commission want to see done in the next 2 years, we are in the process of developing cost estimates for those projects. And then what we'd like to do is send out another survey saying, now that you see what these projects cost, what are your opinions or what are your answers to these questions? So there's 23, I think, projects, and the idea is that each planning commission would go through each of those 23 projects and answer 4 or 5 questions on each one so that we can get a better idea of where everyone stands with those projects. So those surveys are going to be going out the first week of April, likely via email, and then the idea is that you get a week to do them via email and send them back to us so that we can tabulate everyone's answers. Any questions on that? The Town and Country Animal Clinic, they submitted back in October, and we didn't hear from them for a while. They've now revised and resubmitted for the animal clinic on the south side of M59. So that site plan will be coming to the Planning Commission potentially on April 10th. April 10th is significant because if all goes well, that will be the first meeting where the Planning Commission will have the authority to approve site plans without those site plans then having to go to the Township Board. And so the Town and Country Animal Clinic may very well be the first site plan that can be approved by the Planning Commission. So depending on how the reviews come back for that one, we're looking at April 10th. In that same realm, the round 3 of the zoning ordinance amendments will be on the Township Board's agenda for March 18th, next Tuesday. And as you've heard me say before, the most significant of those amendments being shifting site plan approval authority from the Township Board to the Planning Commission. So if those amendments get adopted on March 18th, then there has to be a notice of adoption in the newspaper, and then the amendments take effect 7 days after that adoption, or 7 days after that notice of adoption appears in the newspaper. So now you're looking at late March, which is why we looked at April 10th for Town and Country Animal Clinic, because then they can come before the Planning Commission, get their approval before this body, and not have to make that extra step of going to the Township Board. That's everything I have on my list of things to discuss as part of the planning report.
All right, thanks. Committee reports, anyone? Nope. Need a motion to adjourn, please.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you and good night.